I've got something that's very special that I need his expertise skills to work on. Because this item is so personal and actually very emotional to me.
When Drew and Rebecca Pritchard's marriage collapsed in 2017, the tabloids focused on scandal. But while the headlines chased Drew, almost no one asked what Rebecca had truly lost. Because she didn't just lose a husband, she lost a partnership she helped build from the ground up. How much was Rebecca really sacrificing while the world saw her as simply Drew's wife? And where is she now that she's finally stepped out of his shadow? Join us as we uncover what really happened to Rebecca Pritchard from Salvage Hunters. From fashion to salvage. Before she ever appraised a Georgian sideboard on television, Rebecca Pritchard was already navigating the difficult worlds of global fashion and property development. She built a career over nearly 2 decades in the women's fashion industry, working across wholesale and manufacturing in both the UK and Hong Kong. This period was when she learned international trade and the business acumen she would later rely on. After her extensive fashion career, Rebecca went into the world of property development. She relocated her entrepreneurial energy to North Wales, where she became deeply involved in managing real estate. This was hands-on work that required negotiation skills to secure house purchases and the operational savvy to run a campsite and holiday let business. And it was precisely this world of Welsh property and restoration that brought her directly into the path of a man whose name was becoming synonymous with architectural salvage in the region. Their relationship began in the early 2000s. Drew Pritchard, already an established dealer with an obsessive eye for the unusual and the beautiful, found in Rebecca someone who understood his drive. She wasn't just a life partner, she was a fellow traveler in the world of business and design. As they built their life together in Conwy, their professional and personal worlds became deeply intertwined. Drew scoured the country for salvage, while Rebecca applied her formidable organizational and business skills to the growing operation behind the scenes. But as their partnership deepened and their business began to flourish, another, more private dimension of Rebecca's life was taking center stage, one she would fiercely protect from the public eye. During the 1990s and 2000s, they had 2 children, a son named Tom, born in 1999, though some sources suggest 1992, and a daughter named Grace. This period of motherhood was important to Rebecca's character. Even as their work would later catapult them into the national spotlight, Rebecca made a deliberate and unwavering decision to build a wall of privacy around Tom and Grace. Unlike many who love the thrills of fame, Rebecca understood the distinction between a public career and a private life, and she acted decisively to keep her children entirely out of the media glare. By 2011, she had a lifetime of experience in fashion, property, business, and motherhood. She was a formidable partner in a growing enterprise. So, when the opportunity to step in front of the cameras arrived, what role would this multifaceted businesswoman actually play? The rise of Salvage Hunters. When Salvage Hunters first aired in 2011, it tapped into something the public didn't know they were craving. Here was no staged renovation show with presenters shouting over power tools. This was something more authentic, a window into the real world of architectural salvage, where beauty had to be excavated from layers of neglect. And at its heart was a compelling double act. Drew Pritchard, the obsessive, instinct-driven dealer with an encyclopedic eye, and Rebecca Pritchard, the composed figure who seemed to exist specifically to translate his obsession into something the rest of the world could understand. The show gained remarkable popularity at a rapid pace. Within its first few years, Salvage Hunters became one of Quest's flagship programs, pulling in audiences who were fascinated not just by the objects, but by the dynamic between its 2 leads. While Drew would become transfixed by a rusty fairground carousel or a pile of reclaimed church pews, His eyes lighting up at the historical significance, Rebecca was the one asking the practical questions. Where would you put it? How much will it cost to transport? Who is actually going to buy this? Episode after episode, season after season, the public saw what appeared to be a united front. Here was a husband and wife team, not just hosting a television show together, but visibly running a business empire from their base in Conwy. To the millions watching at home, Rebecca and Drew were the picture of a partnership that had successfully merged love and work. They were building something together, and the cameras were lucky enough to capture it. But television, by its very nature, only shows what happens in front of the lens. What was happening behind the scenes, in the parts of the business the cameras never visited? During this period of peak visibility, when she was appearing regularly on screens across the UK and internationally, Rebecca was actually doing far more than the show ever revealed. The episodes, necessarily compressed into entertaining 40-minute segments, could only ever show a fraction of her daily reality. While Drew was out hunting, sometimes for days at a time, traveling to remote farmhouses and derelict factories, Rebecca was often the one holding everything together at headquarters. She was running the business operations, managing the finances, and overseeing the research that went into verifying the objects Drew found. At the same time, she was cultivating client relationships and ensuring that the company remained profitable even when Drew's acquisitions bordered on the commercially questionable. If she were this essential to the business's survival, what would happen to that carefully constructed image if the foundation of their personal relationship ever began to shift? Behind the scenes. By 2015, Salvage Hunters had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The show was a proven success, drawing loyal viewers who tuned in week after week to watch Drew chase his latest obsession, while Rebecca provided the steadying influence that made the whole enterprise feel relatable. But somewhere around this time, attentive viewers began to notice something they couldn't quite understand. Rebecca wasn't appearing as often as she used to. The absence was subtle at first. Perhaps she was simply busy elsewhere in the business while the cameras followed Drew on a particular hunt. But as the months rolled on through 2015 and into 2016, the pattern became harder to ignore. There were entire episodes where Rebecca was nowhere to be seen, replaced by other faces from the Pritchard family, or simply by Drew alone, navigating negotiations without his familiar counterpart. When she did appear, something felt different. The easy shorthand that had defined their on-screen relationship seemed strained, replaced by a formality that hadn't been there before. The playful arguments were fewer. The shared glances that once communicated entire conversations were largely absent. Longtime viewers, the ones who had watched religiously since the early seasons, began posting in fan forums and online discussion boards, comparing notes and sharing observations. Has anyone else noticed that Rebecca seemed distant? Was it just editing, or was something actually wrong? Behind the scenes, away from the cameras and the fan speculation, the whispers had already begun circulating in the antique trade circles where Drew and Rebecca had long been prominent figures. Dealers who crossed paths with the couple at fairs and auctions picked up on tensions that went beyond the normal strains of running a business together. Something was undeniably off between them, though nobody outside their inner circle knew exactly what. The rumblings remained just that, rumblings, confined to industry gossip and the speculative corners of internet fandom. The production company continued filming, the episodes continued airing, and the public face of Salvage Hunters remained largely intact to the casual viewer. But for those paying close attention, the evidence was accumulating. Fewer episodes with Rebecca, less screen time when she did appear, and a certain unmistakable tension in the moments the cameras captured. The united front that had charmed millions was showing cracks, and those cracks were widening with each passing season. What was happening behind the closed doors of the Conwy home that the public had never seen. Cracks in the facade. In 2017, the carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. The divorce became public, and with it came a flood of tabloid headlines that reduced decades of partnership to scandalous sound bites. The narrative that emerged was messy and deeply uncomfortable for anyone who had watched the couple on screen for years. This was no amicable separation conducted behind closed doors. This was a very public unraveling that played out in magistrates' courts and newspaper columns across the country. The details that emerged painted a picture far more complicated than anyone had suspected. At the center of it all was an affair, a specific documented relationship between Drew and a woman named Amanda Thomas, the wife of a local businessman named Janus Thomas. The affair reportedly lasted for 2.5 years, a secret parallel existence that ran alongside the television appearances, the business operations, and the public image of a united couple building an empire together. When Amanda eventually ended the relationship and confessed to her husband, who agreed to forgive her and give their marriage another chance, the situation might have remained a private tragedy contained within a few households. But then came the text message. In April 2017, Drew allegedly sent Amanda a text message accusing her husband of being a coward. It was a small act of digital provocation, perhaps born of hurt or frustration, but its consequences would ripple far beyond anything the sender could have anticipated. Amanda, for reasons that remain unclear, showed the message to Janus. When Janus later spotted Drew in the beer garden of the Liverpool Arms pub in Conwy, North Wales, something inside him snapped. The years of betrayal, the humiliation of the affair, the fresh wound of that insulting message, all erupted in a moment of violence. Janus Thomas attacked Drew in full view of other patrons, an outburst that transformed a private scandal into a public spectacle. By the time it was over, the police were involved, the courts would soon follow, and the carefully guarded private lives of the Pritchard family were about to become front-page news. When the case reached Llandudno Magistrates Court in October 2017, the full story spilt out into public record. Thomas pleaded guilty to assault and threatening behavior, receiving a fine of £1,449. He was also ordered to pay Drew £100 in compensation, along with a victim surcharge and court costs. But the legal resolution was almost beside the point. The damage to the public image of Salvage Hunters' leading couple was irreversible. The tabloids had a field day, splashing the story across their pages with headlines that emphasized the sordid details. Photographs of Drew with a bruised and bloodied face circulated online. Reporters dug into the background of everyone involved, and suddenly, Rebecca was cast in a role no one would choose. The wronged ex-wife, the woman whose marriage had collapsed under the weight of betrayal, forced to watch the intimate details of her personal life dissected in the press, while the world speculated about what she had known and when she had known it. For Rebecca, this was the absolute low point. The woman who had spent years guarding her family's privacy, who had successfully kept her children entirely out of the spotlight, now found herself at the center of a story she never wanted to tell. How does someone rebuild from this while still standing next to the person who hurt them, smiling for the cameras, and trying to salvage something from the wreckage of a life they spent decades constructing? The unraveling. After the humiliation of watching her private life dissected in public, no one would have blamed Rebecca Pritchard for severing all ties with Drew and the show that had made them both famous. She could have retreated behind the privacy she had always valued, leaned on the business acumen that had served her for decades, and built something new away from the cameras. Instead, Rebecca did something that surprised everyone who had been following the story. She stayed. For those willing to look past the scandal, the explanation was both simpler and more complicated than the gossip columns suggested. They had a business to run together. a brand that depended on their on-screen dynamic, and contracts that couldn't simply be abandoned because their marriage had failed. But beyond the practical considerations, there was something else at work, something that would only become clear in the months that followed, as a new figure began appearing regularly on screen alongside them. John T. entered the Salvage Hunters universe gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. A dealer in his own right, with a specialty in architectural antiques and a reputation within the trade, he began appearing in episodes as a supplier, someone Drew visited to source interesting pieces. But over time, his role expanded. He became a recurring presence, then a familiar face, then something approaching a third anchor for the show. But it was in his interactions with Rebecca that viewers began to notice something shifting. The dynamic between them was different from anything the show had captured before. Lighter, easier, marked by genuine laughter and an unforced rapport that hadn't been visible in Rebecca's on-screen presence for years. The speculation began almost immediately. Fan forums lit up with questions about whether there was something romantic developing between Rebecca and John T. The chemistry was undeniable, and in the absence of official explanations, viewers filled the void with their own theories. But the truth, as it so often does, defied the simple narratives of romance. What viewers were witnessing wasn't necessarily the beginning of a love story. It was something more subtle and perhaps more significant. They were watching Rebecca Pritchard remember who she was outside the context of a difficult marriage. For years, her on-screen identity had been defined by her relationship to Drew. But with John T., none of that baggage existed. He wasn't her ex-husband. He was simply a colleague, a fellow professional with whom she shared an interest in beautiful objects and the business of selling them. And in that uncomplicated space, something in Rebecca began to relax. The guarded quality that had crept into her later episodes with Drew melted away. She laughed more freely, engaged more openly, seemed more fully herself than she had in years. The chemistry viewers noticed and speculated about wasn't necessarily romantic at all. It was the simple, profound relief of being seen as oneself rather than as half of a broken pair. This period, stretching through 2017 and into 2018, became something of an experiment for Rebecca, whether she intended it that way or not. With John T. as her primary on-screen partner in many episodes, she was testing a new version of herself, one not defined by marital status or scandal, but by her own expertise, her own wit, her own capacity for connection. The audience responded to it enthusiastically, perhaps without fully understanding why the show felt different, better, more alive. The ratings remained strong, and the speculation about Rebecca and John continued to circulate, adding an extra layer of intrigue to each episode they shared. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that this new configuration might become the show's permanent future. Rebecca and John, two professionals with easy chemistry, carrying Salvage Hunters forward into a new era. But television contracts are finite things, and John T. was, ultimately, his own man with his own career. His appearances on the show, however beloved by viewers, were never guaranteed to be permanent. And as 2018 progressed, people began to wonder, had Rebecca found something essential in that brief period of lightness and ease, something she could carry forward regardless of who shared the screen with her? Or had she lost something by having to let John T. go? Life after Drew. In 2018 and beyond, Rebecca Pritchard constructed a life that looks nothing like the one television viewers watched for years. The woman who once stood beside Drew in nearly every episode has deliberately carved out an existence that prioritizes her own independence and her own interests. Today, she divides her time between two very different worlds. There is a residence in Chester, a solid base in a historic city that offers convenience and connection. But there is also her boat in London, a floating home that speaks to something deeper in her character. A desire for mobility, for simplicity, for a life that doesn't anchor her too firmly to any single place. The boat allows her to be in the capital when work demands it while maintaining a sense of separation from the frantic pace of London life. When she's not on the water, she's often on horseback, riding through the countryside that has become familiar over decades in North Wales. She also maintains a love of caravanning, taking herself to unexpected corners of the country, with the same independent spirit that sent her into property development years before anyone knew her name. Professionally, Rebecca has returned to the entrepreneurial model that served her long before television. Having stepped back from her central role on Salvage Hunters, she now runs her own business as a dealer, researcher, and finder of decorative antiques. Her clients are private collectors and interior designers who seek out her expertise for specific pieces, relying on the same eye for quality and value that she developed during her fashion career and refined through decades in the trade. Rebecca also remains active in property refurbishments, returning to the hands-on development work that first brought her to North Wales and into Drew's orbit. The difference now is that every project is entirely her own. Perhaps the most surprising element of Rebecca's present reality is that Drew remains part of it, although in a carefully limited way. Despite the divorce, Rebecca and Drew have managed to create a functional working relationship that has outlasted their marriage by years. She continues to make occasional appearances on the main show, stepping back in front of the cameras to help analyze items and offer the grounded perspective that made her a fan favorite. These appearances are not the most important focus of her life anymore, but the business they built together and the mutual respect for what the other brings professionally have proven more durable than the marriage itself. Was Rebecca better off stepping out of the spotlight, or should she have taken full control of the show after the divorce? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.